Looking to build a perfect task manager for Notion? You've come to the right place. In this video, I'll walk you step by step through the process of going from this to this. Alright, we're starting completely from scratch with an empty page so you can follow along every step of the way. First up, let's give this a name. Let's call this the perfect task manager, and then let's assign it a corresponding icon. I like to go for the Notion one, but of course, feel free to adapt that as you like it. And then we will select the empty page option. Now, in this video and also in general when I build out systems in Notion, I want to first focus on the backend. And backend in Notion means mostly building out the database structure. Because in Notion, pretty much any system that is powerful and like a good best practice approach means that you're using Notion's databases to build things out. They're so much more powerful than if you were to just use, like lazy checkboxes like this in a page. And if you don't know that yet, you'll notice in a second once we have that ready. But yeah, for that video, that means we first will build out these databases, and then we will later in the second half focus on the front end, where we then build the dashboards and the actual way of how we interact with all the information. All right, in order to do that, let's just type /database. That gives us a new clean database in our page. And at the same time, let's turn on full width in the top right corner to make sure that we have a bit more screen real estate to work with. I'm also going to zoom in one more level just so everything's a bit bigger on your screen. Next up, let's call this our tasks DB. Perfect. And then I always like to delete this initial property, even if we add tags back in, just so we have a clean, fresh start. So next up, it's time to think about what properties do we actually need to power our task manager. And the first one that we certainly need is an indication of whether something is done or not. Now, in the past, what I would do is I would simply use a checkbox. And there's nothing wrong with this approach, right? This is the easiest one. You just add a checkbox and you say done, ? And then you can make it even very tiny small and put it in the beginning of this. And then you can just check it off whenever you've done a task. So that's totally fine if you want to go down that route. In this video, however, I will actually use instead a status property. And that's simply because in Notion, we have a few things where it's actually beneficial now to have the full status property in these 3 stages, even if we don't need them always in our for tasks, right? For tasks, it's a bit overkill typically to say have these 3 different levels. But what we can just do is we can just show this as a checkbox, and in the backend it still has these different properties, and checking something off just means it switches to done immediately. And you will see later it allows us to do a few cool things in terms of some automations. So let's keep it like this, and let's move this to the front, and then let's also change the icon here. So just we know this means whether it's checked or not. So I like to get the check mark, and then we have an immediate visual indication what this checkbox is for. Besides knowing whether something is done or not, the second most important information in a task manager is, of course, whether we have a deadline or a due date. So let's add it in next. Click on plus again, search for, not due, but for date. Add that property in, and then let's just call this our due date. Awesome. While we're at it, we can also then add a quick select field. So here I will, or actually a multi-select one for applying several tags. And let's call this context. Now, here I'm just going to pick I think the form and shapes icon I like quite a bit for this, just to indicate, we have different things in here. And this is something that comes from the GTD philosophy, right? Where you want to maybe tag certain tasks based on in what context you want to do them. And things that I like to add here, but again, you can customize this to your own specific needs, would be something like, let's just move myself over here again, low energy, right? So let's get a battery that is empty to indicate, okay, this is something, that we can do even if we don't have any energy left. Then of course, also the corresponding version with high energy, high energy. Something else that, nowadays not as relevant, but maybe for you still an important part is you could track things that involve your phone, right? So for phone calls, so let's get a phone next and say, okay, this has to happen, with the phone. And then last but not least, let's add a lightning bolt for some quick wins, right? So this would be applied to tasks that can be just blaze through at the end of the day. And these are just a few nice options that then later on we can use in our views to filter and say, okay, I really don't have any energy right now. Show me everything in a task manager that I can do right now. And of course, we can just quickly also change the color, right? So low energy might be our gray thing, high energy, maybe, that red sounds about right. Phone, let's take a blue, and the quick win, let's take a yellow, just to have some different colors here in the tags. Awesome. So now we have our due date, the context, and whether something is done or not. Now let's add in a first advanced property, a formula property that tells us how many days are left until the deadline. And don't worry, even if you've never written a formula before, I promise this one is very easy and you can get it done. So let's click on plus, let's select, select our formula, and let's call this days remaining. And now let's go into the formula and say, okay, give me the date between. And then first, let's pick the later dates, which is the due date, and then now with two quotation marks, with two brackets, and then another comma, quotation marks, and days. Now the way to read this means, so Notion, please give me the date between the due date and now, and return that number in days. So let's click on done. And first here, nothing shows up because we don't have a date in here. But if we now pick here, okay, give me the 14th, we see, okay, 2 days are remaining in between this. And if it were on today, right, we have it set to 0. Perfect. Now let's continue adding a few more useful properties. First up, we will add another date property, and this one will be our finish date. So in Notion, it's actually kind of hard to record the date when you are done with the task, or at least that was the case. Now with a few recent feature updates, it's much easier, and it can be quite useful for a lot of other things, right? To then later know, okay, when did I actually do that? So if you don't need it, you can skip that, but I find it quite useful. And I will go in here and just add a different, icon to visually distinguish it from the due date. So that's our finish date. Now let's just add like a generic multi-select property in for tags, right? In case you want to tag things by something. And then after that, we just need one last property, I think, for now, and that would be our priority. So here, let's take a select property. Let's call this priority, and then get an exclamation mark, and then have our usual levels of low, medium, and high. And then just, of course, with the corresponding colors, right? So high would probably be red, medium, maybe something like yellow. And yeah, that's already the case. And then blue for a low priority. Awesome. By the way, we're starting off by building this for single player mode. But later in this video, I will also show you how you can expand the setup if you need it to work in a team environment. And if you don't want to build this yourself, check out the link in the description for a ready-made template. Now, this is already a pretty solid task manager for Notion, but let's crank it up a few notches. First up, let's add subtasks here. And for that, actually, let's just add some dummy data in here first. So we just say task A, task B, and task C. And then let's click on these 3 dots here, and then on sub-items, and here turn on sub-items. And now what happens is you see here at the very front, we get this toggle to open and close our items. And we can now add sub-items, right? So I can now say, okay, this is now a child task. And I can say also like another child task 2. And then you can just, close the toggle, and then they're all collapsed. And it's, of course, infinite levels, right? So you could open up your child task and so on and so on. And this is quite nice. And the way this works actually in the backend is that Notion has automatically in your properties created 2 new properties, parent item and sub item. So if you want, you can rename them right to parent task and subtask, or you can leave it as is. But it's very useful to know how this works. And actually, you can also go into your sub items and always, change the settings. For one, you could say, okay, actually, show the nesting toggle on the title or not. Or you could do something like turning them off in this view so that they don't even appear. But yeah, just again, useful to know where that feature sits. Moving on, let's add some simple time tracking to our task manager. And for that, we first need one additional helper property. So we already have the time when we finish it, right? But you don't have currently like a property to record when we start something. So let's quickly add that, another date property, and let's call this start time. And here, this is one that we usually don't even need to see. So it's, again, just a backend property. And behind it, we will add now a database button. This is a fairly new feature in Notion that we can have database buttons that trigger certain effects just for that row. And this one we will call, start tracking. And you see, once I do that, it automatically also updates the button. Here, I actually just want to rename this to start and maybe give this like a green dot. So let's pick the green dot and, let's call this start. And now set up. And what we want to do is when this button is clicked, please take my the start time that I have and fill in the current timestamp. That's the first thing that I want to do. And then the second thing that I might want to do is like just make sure that this is actually now in progress. So we can also say, okay, the status, make sure that we set this to in progress if it's not already there. And this is one of the situations that now comes in handy that we have more than just a checkbox in order to do that. And that means now whenever I click this button, you will see I click here, it fills out the start time here, and I get this like weird in between thingy in the checkbox, right? It's not undone, it's not done, it's like in between, it's in progress. All right. Now the second thing that we of course need is we need to stop the tracker again. So again, let's add another button and let's call this stop tracking. And here then again, let's add like a red dot, red circle and stop. And here, when this button is clicked, then please let's update the finish date with the current time, and let's set our status to none. All right, that's pretty much it. Now all that's left is another formula property to just calculate how long a task is taking us. So let's add formula and let's call this task duration or task time. And here it's a similar formula to the days remaining. We take date between, and this time we will take the finish date, and then we will take the start time. And now this time we want to return this probably in minutes, right? For like a smaller interval than days. And now the second we click here on stop, it will fill out the finish time and then calculate the total minutes that we spent on this. All right, we spent, well, 1 minute, right? From 46 to 47 on this task. Now, one important caveat with this method, you basically can only stop the timer once and end it once, right? This is a very, very simple time tracking. So you can't like pause the timer and then, come back to it later. If you need a more elaborate, more robust time tracking system, let me know down in the comments. Then I'll record a separate video on how you can do that. But again, for just like this very simple one where you can say, okay, like how long does this roughly take? This is great to have. Now, as you probably noticed, this doubles also to allow us to, check off the task that is done with just the click of one button, and at the same time set the finish date. So for example, if you say you don't want to use the time tracking, but you still care about, knowing your finish date, then you could just rename this button to, instead of saying stop tracking, like done, and then it just sets the task to done and fills out the finish date, so you know that later. Now, one other way to set the finish date in Notion would be to use database automation, right? Here you can pretty much do the same thing. You can say, okay, when something was set to done in terms of the status, then please fill out the finish date. So these are the two approaches for how you can record it, and then later, come back and actually see, okay, how many tasks did I finish on any given day. Before we continue, quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, Morgen. Morgen is an amazing tool that allows you to combine your calendar, task management, and scheduling in one place. And they just released their native Notion integration, which makes it the perfect companion for this task manager in Notion. Most importantly, they not just integrate with Google Calendar, but also with Outlook, Apple, and others. So if you first got all excited by Notion's recent calendar release, and then all sad because you couldn't really use it, well, then this one is for you. So just to quickly show you the integration. Here's the Morgen app, and as you can see, next to my calendar, I have here on the left side my different tasks integrated. And I have by default the Morgen task, right? So you can just use Morgen also as a task manager. And then I have next to it my Notion integrated. And in here, you see it automatically pulls in the task from the task database, and then it shows them either by the dates, right? So overdue, today, and upcoming. And then I can also select another grouping. So here I currently have it set up to group by priority, right? So I have high, medium, low, but I could also say, okay, please group it by projects. And then you see, okay, now I get my projects here. And then inside each of the grouping, you can then pick a secondary thing. In my case, please show it by status. So let's go back to by priority and then by status. So I see, okay, under my no priority items, I have currently 3 things: work and integration video, play around with to-dos integration, and something important I nearly forgot. I can then just take these tasks and drag them into my calendar to time block as usual, right? So I can say, okay, play around with to-dos integration, that will take quite a while, and work on the integration video, that will be after that, and that will take this much time. As you can see, I get an indicator that this task comes from Notion. So if I have actually like something else integrated as well, so in this case, my Todoist, I could say, well, okay, let's actually do some Todoist work, afterwards. And then I get the Todoist indication that this is from that other app. Now, one important thing that tripped me up initially is that it doesn't appear automatically in your calendar, right? So even if you set a due date, it will show here, right? So it shows you that you have a certain due date, so Feb 3, this is by when I should have done this, but it still waits for you to schedule it. So it's a different approach to it, right? It won't automatically show you when you have your things to do, but it just shows you your calendar and then allows you to add the tasks there. Once they're added, they also get synced to your Google Calendar, right? So if I go back to my Google Calendar, I will see here, again, I have play around with to-do list integration and work on integration video. This is just a Google Calendar view, right? So this is really cool because that means you have sort of a two-way sync between your Notion tasks and the calendar active. Last but not least, while it is not possible to currently change any of the properties from here, right? So you can't rename a task or you can't change the priority. You can just tick it off as done, right? So either here or in the sidebar, and that will sync back to Notion, right? So basically the workflow is you create the entries in Notion, you tag them and you see then everything in here. And then you can, after you schedule them, you can say, okay, this is done. And then if you head back over to Notion after a moment, these will flip back to done. There you have it. Work on integration video is now finished. So check out Morgen yourself with the link in the description. And now back to building the perfect task manager in Notion. Time to now add projects into the mix so that we can then group our tasks by, well, the respective projects. And for that, we want to create a separate database. Basically in Notion, whenever we have a different type of data, right, that requires different meta information, right, so different properties, we want to create separate databases for it. So in this case, let's now again create it here. And let's call this our projects DB. And then here as well, we will delete the default one. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to connect these two databases so that we can start grouping tasks to projects. And for that, what we want to do is we want to create a relation property. So let's add a relation and let's pick the database that we want to relate it to. So the task database we just created previously, and say that we want to see it on both ends, right? So let's move myself over here, show on task database, and then we can just rename it, right? So here on projects, it should say tasks, and on task database, it should probably say project, right? Because we only have one project per task. All right. One other tip that I would recommend doing in order to just keep things a bit cleaner is to swap out the icon in here, right? To correspond with the task. So for tasks, right, we have this check mark. So here, let's quickly change this also into the check mark. And then here for projects, if we scroll to the very end, actually it doesn't appear automatically. We need to go to properties. And then here we see we have now this project relation as well. And we can also here just change that for what I like to do there. And I think for projects, I typically like this target icon. All right. Another nice thing is we have now, okay, let's see, we have our project 1, we have project 2, and we have project, number 3. We can now connect it to the task, right? By simply clicking in here, and it shows us all our tasks, and we can say, okay, task A and task B belongs to the first project, and project number 2 has task C. All right, and you see the corresponding ones up here pop up and fill that out as well. So now we have this connection established. All right, time to add some helpful properties. First, let's add a status here as well. And then let's add a date property to indicate the duration of our project. Awesome. Now, next up, we can activate one specific feature that we so far haven't talked about on tasks, but on projects it might be quite helpful. And that is dependencies. Dependencies allows you in Notion to indicate that a certain item will block another item and that it should be done beforehand. And whether you need it or not really depends on the complexity of stuff that you manage, right? If it's mostly your personal life, then you probably don't need it. If you're, however, in a work environment or particularly in a team environment, then it might be helpful to see for others, okay, so first we need to have these 3 steps finished before we can tackle step 4. The way this will work is that Notion will create 2 new properties. So similar to the subtask feature where we have, parent and subtask, it will add 2 properties here that are called blocking and block by to indicate, this relation. And the cool thing is that once we turn this on, let's actually just do this, we can tell Notion to please automatically shift the due date, so the duration that we've set for something, when there's a collision, right? So you have different options. You can say, okay, always maintain the time between items. That can be a bit much, but I like particularly this option of shifting when the dates overlap, right? So the second I move like a blocking item to a point where, the end date is later than the start date of something that's blocked by, it will automatically move the later one out. You can then also say whether you want to avoid vegans or not. I work vegan, so I don't want that to happen. And you can turn it on. Now you see, you get now these 2 new properties. And again, here I would just recommend to replace them with some properties that make a little bit more sense to you visually. So let's get a hand here, and then let's take a stop sign here for the blocking, blocked by and blocking. And now I could say, for example, okay, my project 1 is actually blocking project 2, right? So I click in the blocking column and select project 2. and then it will pop up here as blocked by. Now, this alone, right, is not the nicest way to look at it, and we'll talk about views a bit later, but I just want to show you where this becomes relevant if you have, for example, now a timeline view, right, on which you want to show these. And for that, actually, we should set a duration here. So let's say project 1 that goes from 1st of Feb until end of Feb, and then the next project will go from the 2nd of March until the end of March. Now, if I go into my timeline, I see my items in here, right? So I have my current project, and then I have the next one. Let's actually look at this maybe by the quarter. And we see we have this yellow line that indicates, okay, project 1 is currently blocking project 2. And you see now, if I move project 2 in a way that it, like overlaps with project 2, it automatically pushes out project 2. Now, be very careful, right? Like if I do it in the other way, it doesn't automatically adjust that, but at least this one level is quite nice to have. So that's the blocked by and blocking property for the task manager. Next, let's create an easy progress bar to indicate how far an individual project has come, right? And in order to do so, we need to create a formula property. So let's click on plus, say formula, and let's call this progress. Oops, progress. And again, swap out the icon for like a nice progress bar. And here in the formula, we want to like now look at the tasks that we've connected to it and figure out how many of these tasks have been done. And the way to do so is that first we take tasks, so the name of our connection, and then we will type dot, filter, open the bracket, and then take current, dot, and then status, equals, and now type in quotation marks the name of whatever status you have, right? So that indicates that it's done. So in my case, that's done. If you renamed it, you would need to type something else in here. That's the first step. And what this basically tells Notion is to please go into this connection, the task connection, and then filter items and only show me the ones that have a status equal to done. So if I click on OK, you just see that in progress A, it will only show me task A because that's the one that I have set to done. But if I were to check task B now, task B would pop up here as well. And again, if you uncheck it, it disappears. So that's the first step, right? Just showing the remaining open tasks. But now we want to take it one step further and say, okay, well, how many are that? And for that, just type dot and then length. And now it counts the length of this array. So we see now, okay, now we have 1, and otherwise we would have 2 if I check both. All right, so that's the total number of tasks. And now, of course, we want the percent progress. So in order to do that, we need to divide this by the total number of tasks that we have. And we can either type the slash one, or we can just continue with like dot divide, and I actually like this because then it's a bit more readable. And we say, okay, please divide this by, and then just take tasks dot length, right? So the number of all tasks that we have. Now we get the relative number, right, 0.5, and you can just stop there, right, and just say, okay, now please edit property and say, okay, number format, please show this as a percent value, and then give me the progress bar next to it to indicate, right? Or if you want, you can even remove the progress bar to just show that. Now, if you want to show the percent for the progress, then one thing that I would recommend is to actually round this yourself, because sometimes Notion has a weird bug, so let's actually just create another task in here. That we have, and you see it has like this, it doesn't round the percent value very well. So now it just like keeps showing 66, this is not very nice. So in order to like fix that issue, what you want to do is type dot here again, and then first do multiply, open brackets, and we want to multiply the whole value by 100. Then we want to round it, and then we want to divide it again by 100. And now you will get a rounded value, right? You see now 67%. If you actually want it with like a comma value, you could like just add 1 or 2 zeros here for the multiply and divide. Then you get the corresponding thing. The reason we have to do it like that is that the round command in the formula will always round to the nearest full number. So if you were to round the comma value, just would round to either 0 or 1. So that's why we first, multiplied by 1,000 and divided by 1,000 to get into this nice, rounded percent value. So bit of a workaround, but just one-time setup, and then you have this nice little progress bar that automatically updates with the corresponding percent value whenever you check off a task or not. Right now 100%, and now back to 33%. We can add even more formula magic and figure out what is the next task that we should do for any given project. For that, let's click on plus and say, okay, formula again. Let's call this next task ? And add like just this arrow to indicate it as a symbol. Then in the formula, we need to write something that is slightly more complicated, but don't worry, just follow this step by step or copy paste it from the blog post link in the description. So we need to first take tasks. And tasks, we then need to say, okay, please find me the one entry in tasks where the current value's due date equals the next due date in line. Well, how do we find the next due date in line? Well, we need to take the whole task array, the whole task connection. Here, first filter out everything where the status is not done, right? So like only things where it's not done should remain. That's why we use the exclamation equal. That means not equal to. So wherever the status is not done, we want to keep that. And then we want to take from these items the due date. So that's what we do with map, right? With map, we can build a new array and say, okay, please only keep the due dates. And from these due dates, we can then say, please sort them and then take the very first entry in that list. Now, after all of that, right, we can click on done. And again, if this is a bit complicated, I also have a tutorial in the linked below in the description that teaches you a bit more about formulas and understanding like how exactly this works. But for now, we can just click on done. Now we see, okay, the next task in line here is task A, which if we check it, yep, task A, 3rd February, that's the one that we need to do next. If I check that off now, it should jump to next task. Perfect, because that one is February 11th. And if I check that one off, it will show task B. So now you have this one property that will show you whenever you have, like the next open tasks based on their due date at a glance on your projects database. We're making some great progress with this build and the backend is nearly done. But before we can move on to the front end, we need to add 2 things. First, we want to create some standard views on our databases, and then we want to set up some database templates. First, views. The cool thing in Notion, right, is that you can store all your information in this database, and then you can create targeted views to only show you the information that you need. Because let's be honest, this here is not the most, intuitive view to work with your tasks every single day. And the reason why we will create these views now here on these main databases and not later only on the dashboard is that in Notion, the views that are created on your main database instance can just be copied elsewhere very easily. Let me just show you what I mean, right? So if I have now a sample view here, and if I later and say, okay, in this sample view, I just don't want to see any properties. And if later, let's assume down here, right, this is my dashboard that I build later, I say, okay, please create a linked view of a database. And I take my task database, you see I can now select the 2 views that I've created earlier. So it just makes it later much easier and simpler and faster to build out your dashboard. That's why we create these views now. All right, so which are some of the most important views for a task manager? Well, the very first one is probably a today view. So let's take the sample view and just rename it and let's call this today. And here, let's say we go in our icons and we want to pick from the calendar this individual day icon. And for our today view, the first thing that we want to see is, okay, which properties do we need to see here? And what I would recommend is that whenever you build these views and pick what properties you select, only show the ones that you actually need to interact with in that moment. So what we definitely want to see is the status, right? Because that's just super helpful. And we want to always have that as this checkbox at the very front, at the very front of our database. Next up, let's go back here, 3 dots, properties. We want to see the due date, yep, because we might have to change it, right? Even if the due date is by default today, we might have to modify it. So let's show it here. And we might want to see the priority. All right. And then depending on whether or not we use the time track or not, we could also choose to show the time tracking buttons, but actually let's leave them out of here. And the last thing I want to see on this view is just then the project. All right, so now this is like basically a very simple core view if I just need to glance at this and see, okay, what are the things that I need to do today? But of course we're not done yet because it shows all the database entries. So we need to go to filter and set up a filter. Now, what I would recommend is that if you have basically 2 types of filters, right? You have the normal filters and you have something Notion calls advanced filters. 9 out of 10 times I would recommend you to set advanced filters. The normal filters, I would only choose them if you need to modify the filter often. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we have in our priority, right? Let's say we have, these 2 ones are high, the next one is medium or like low, and this one is medium. If I now go into filter and say, okay, please, let's filter by priority. You see that I get this like little gray icon here at the top of my database that shows me, okay, priority. And then I can just click in here and quickly, flip through them and say, okay, show me only medium, show me only high, and so on and so on. So in these situations, having this type of filter, the simple filter, is okay if you want to like often change what to filter for. But in our case, where we say, okay, on the today view, I only want to see today's date, that's something that has to be always there. In that case, I would always set it as an advanced filter because it's just more intuitive for me to set them up. So let's click on Add Advanced Filter and then say, okay, where? And you see you have now 3 things. First, you can choose the property to filter by, then you can choose the operator and then the value. So in terms of the operator, we need to get the due date. And then we want to make sure that the start date is today, right? In this case, it now shows me only the tasks for today and nothing else. Now, that view is like not bad, but you probably also need to see the tasks that are overdue, right? So the tasks that had a prior due date. So you actually need to modify this rule and say, you know, it's either on or before today. And now you will see everything that is due today or was due in the past on your today view. Moving on, let's also create actually a view that only shows overdue tasks. So for that, we can simply like right-click our today view and duplicate it. Then we don't have to not have to set up everything individually again. And let's rename this to overdue. And here, you know, we should probably show like some sort of an alert to indicate, well, this is not good. And now in terms of our filter, we just want to make sure, well, that it is not on or before today. It's just before today. And this now shows everything that is in the past. So basically overdue. And then just one more thing, let's also show everything that will be coming up this week. So let's again duplicate our today view and let's call this this week. And again, change the icon to maybe we have another, what other calendar do we have? This one, the week calendar. And here, just again, modify our filter ever so slightly to show us tasks that where the start date is relative to today, this week, right? So this will show you everything in the upcoming week. This is already a solid mix of views, right? We can now see today, overdue, and this week. And now just let's add a few more to the mix. One other thing that might be useful to have is just my tasks by project. So again, let's duplicate our today view and let's call this tasks by projects. And here we will use the project icon that we're using. And now in this case, what we want to do is we want to add a group. Grouping allows you to display things, grouped by what they belong to. So we click on here and then we say, what do we want to group it by? By project. And what this does is you see now you have this project 1 toggle up here. First up here, you have a few more options to set up, right? You can, by what you want to sort it alphabetically, blah, blah, blah. That's good. Hide empty groups also makes sense. So you don't see the things that are not shown. So that is all good. And now we can just collapse this or like show it to show me everything from project 1. Now we still have this filter on for today, so let's actually remove this because on this view we want to see everything that is relevant for us. And now we see, okay, project 1, these are my tasks here, and project 2, these are my tasks there. Now, while setting this up, I'm realizing one thing that we forgot to set up for all these views, so we need to go back and actually do that, and you ideally do it while building it out the first time. And that is, we need to make sure that we hide things that are done, right? This is actually a sort of a preference thing. Some people like to also see the things that they have done, but I would rather have things disappear once I check them off. So let's actually like uncheck them quickly. And then here, add another rule and say, okay, and the status of the task is not, and then now select the complete part. And this means that once I check something off now, let's say task A is done, it just disappears from this view. So it just gives you this feeling of having an actual app. So you would do the same for overdue and this week. I'll do that in a second off screen. And then for tasks and projects, of course, we want to have the same. So add an advanced filter and say status, is not, status is not complete. And now you get this running list of all the tasks broken down by the specific projects. So you get a quick overview over everything you have to do. One quick remark about subtasks that sometimes confuses people. You see that even though task A is done, it still shows up here, but it's grayed out. And that's because it has child items that are not done yet, right? So if this was collapsed, you would see it just like slightly grayed out to indicate, well, okay, this is done, but actually there are things still inside. So if I check off all the sub items, then the whole thing disappears. So sometimes a bit confusing if you have an active interface. Now let's add a few more useful views. So first up, we probably want to have a calendar. So for that, let's click on plus and here pick the calendar option. Let's just call this calendar. And again, like we can just keep this icon here probably and say, okay, we want to have this calendar shown by due date. That's perfect. And you can pick whether you want a monthly calendar or weekly, right? Or you could also set up both. For now, let's stick with month. And open pages, I always like to pick the side peek because that's just a lot more usable for me personally. Now, once you've done that, you see that you have now these cards in your calendar. And we don't have a filter set up, right? Because this time we created it from scratch. We didn't duplicate something, but I actually don't mind it. Here, I don't mind seeing also the tasks that I have already done. But what I definitely want to have is more context as to what these tasks are about. So I click on the 3 dots and then properties and say, okay, please for every item, show me the context, show me the priority, show me the project, and most importantly, the status. And now we see a lot more information on our cards. We can just quickly reorder it. So we can say, okay, I always want to see the status at the very top, then the project, then context, and then priority if there. And now we can do a lot more with that information here. Perfect. So much about the calendar view. Let's add also a board view. So now let's pick the board and just call this Kanban. And here, one thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that under the groupings options, first we have status selected. That's correct. We want to group it by the status, but we want to make sure that we this time not hide empty groups. And that's because I want to have this full Kanban board and be able to drag and drop things between these columns, even if there are no other items in this column already. One other quick little layout thing. I personally like to turn the color on for the columns just to get a bit more visual separation. Perfect. And then just like before, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we see some properties here. So we want to say, okay, show me the context, show me the project, show me actually here. I also want to see the due date. And then the status, I don't need to see, but the priority. So again, why we just pick and select the corresponding information that we want to see on every single item based on, how relevant it is. And actually the due date, let's show that at the very bottom. Perfect. Now, one little thing here is, again, I don't mind seeing done tasks in general on this view on the Kanban board, but if you use this now for a year and you have hundreds and hundreds of done tasks, it would mean, they all fill up this area. So we want to set a filter that avoids that. So we want to make sure to say, okay, filter, let's say set an advanced filter, and first say, okay, show me everything where, not done, but where the status is not done, or alternatively, where the finish date is within the last month. So instead of and, we will choose here an or filter. It means either or needs to be true. So either it is not done or the finish date is like on or after 1 month ago. And this will now show everything where the finish date is, like in the past month, or you could also like adapt it to the past week. And after that, it will disappear from our view, leaving us, with all needed information that we need to see. All right, let's do one last view and then move on to the projects. And for that, let's take a combination of two things, just so you see how it works. Let's say we want now a table view, which means actually I'm going to delete this and I'm going to pick, duplicate one of our existing ones. I'm duplicating the today view. And I want this to be, like a time tracking for deep work. So I will call this time tracking, and let's just, get the stopwatch. And here, what I want to do is in the properties, I also want to show the start tracking and the stop tracking buttons. And I want to make sure that on this page, I don't show all tasks, but I show only the tasks that have the deep work requirement. So let's go in here and say, okay, we want to make sure that our context contains the high energy tasks, right? Now we currently don't have any high energy tasks, but once we have them again, let's just go quickly here and say, okay, this actually task A, the next task, that's the high energy task. We have now this one view where we can then, quickly see, okay, these are most important things. Let's, start a timer on them. And then once we're done with them, let's stop the timer. For project views, we don't need to do as much. We already have our timeline active here. So all I want to do now is create a Kanban board to track our status, our projects across the different status. So let's pick again the board view. Let's make sure that we have it grouped by status and that we don't hide anything. And that we again color our columns and then just set the same filter that we set above, where we say, okay, please in the make sure that we only show projects where the the duration is within the last is on or after 1 month ago, and actually the end date, right? So that like we have the latest, at latest we have something with like 1 month ago, and nothing after that shows up in our quick Kanban here. And of course we also want to see the ones that don't have a due date. So again, let's go back into the filter and make sure, okay, we say either that, or alternatively we want to show everything where the duration is simply empty, right? So those ones should also pop up here. Perfect. And now just like before with the task, we can then choose other properties to show here. So we could say, okay, please give me the progress of that project. and show me the next task. So I, with just a click, can jump into the next thing that I have to do for any of these jobs. Now for one of my absolute favorite features in Notion, and that's a self-referential template. We are going to set up something so that we can click into every project and then see all the tasks that are relevant to that project, just by, like looking into it and then having it here in the body of the page. And in order to do so, we will create a database template. And for that, we click here on the drop-down menu and say, okay, please add a new template. Let's call this new project. Let's also set an icon that we want to use for every project by default, so the project icon. And then I think that's pretty much it. None of these need to be filled out by default. While we're here though, I will quickly reorder them, right? So I want to see the status at the top. I want to see the duration, the next task actually also up here, and the progress. And then, the other ones, they can be down there. Even the task creation, I don't want to see it all, right? Because this might be fairly cluttered. So I just say, okay, please hide this always. And like blocked by and blocking, I wanna, that actually can be there. All right, so let's open this full screen now. And now let's create our dashboard here. So let's type /h1 and let's call this tasks, right? And if you have other steps in your project plan, you could of course add it above or below. In this case, I'm just quickly going to add the task thing. And now I type /create linked view of database. And now I pick my task database. So I'm now embedding my task database, and you see all these views that we previously created now pop up here. So I want to see here maybe just like a Kanban board of all the tasks for this project. And by default, now it means, it shows everything. So the first thing I want to do is I want to hide this just for like a, slightly cleaner view. You could go even one step further and also instead of having here the Kanban, you could swap that just to the task icon. And then one nice little trick is you can just remove this and put a space in here for this very minimal and clean look. And now we have all our tasks here. Of course, we don't want to see all tasks. We only want to see tasks relevant for that specific project. And for that, we now go into filter and add one more rule. Actually, we are running into an issue now because currently we have this or rule here, right? Where they say status is not done or the finish date is 1 month after go. But we need to now add another and rule on top of that, and that doesn't work. So we actually need to modify this filter quickly. Sorry for that. I forgot that while setting it up. So I will remove this filter here and I will instead say, okay, turn this into a group. And then say, okay, where status is not done, or the finish date, the finish date is on or on or after 1 month ago. And now with this group here, I can now set up a second and filter and say and and where the connected project contains this new project. All right, so this I will also modify on the main view in a second, but for now, let's just look at it here. Now we see this is empty, which means first, look, you're like, okay, nothing shows up now, but the true magic happens now when you apply this template to any of your projects. So let's go here to project number 2. The second I click here and pull this template in, it will automatically update the filter that we set to show now the task linked to this, right? So if I inspect this filter, we will see that it now says, well, the project contains project 2. And the same if I go for any of the others, right? If I pull this in here for project 1, it will automatically update to only show the task for project 1, which is absolutely amazing, right? So you never have to set up these little dashboards from scratch. You can just create them once and then, resurface them whenever you have a new project. And of course, you could now pull in a lot more views, right? I will just leave it at this one view. But if you want to see the today tasks for this specific project, you could just, keep expanding that. One last thing we want to do here, and we want to make sure that this project template is applied by default. So let's go in here and say, okay, please set this as a default for all views in the projects database. And that means if I now create a new project, right? So project 4, this will automatically have my template applied here. One cool little trick, in case you didn't know, if you now create actually a task through this view, it will automatically be tagged with that project, right? So if I say, okay, I have a new task that is in progress, task, I think D or E we have. You see now it automatically is connected here to this project, so it makes it much easier to enter information and later than having to go into tasks, enter it, assign it to a specific project. Now let's also create some task templates. And in order to do that, we again click on this drop-down menu and say, okay, new template. And we say, okay, new task. And we can just take the task icon and just leave it as that, right? We don't have any standard content in here. But if we wanted to, we could also now create specific templates for specific metadata, right? Remember we had in this context, we had this high energy thing. So we could say, okay, also let's create another template for high energy task. And let's add here, you know, what battery thingy icons do we have here? Okay, like a full one with a flash maybe, and say, okay, here the context should always be automatically high energy. Or of course, we could do the same for the others, right? For low energy and so on and so on. And that just makes it easier when we create a new task to automatically apply an icon that indicates what this task is about. Now we're finally done with building our backend, so it's time to turn this into a nice and visual dashboard. And the first step here is, now that we are done with our databases, we can turn them into pages. When building it out, I like to keep it on the same page because I sometimes need to jump between it, right? When building out projects, you might remember a new property here in tasks, and it makes it just much easier like this. But when it's, you know, goes to maintenance mode and, you know, using mode, you can click on the 6 dots here and then turn this into a page. Do the same for projects, turn it into a page. Quickly assign the corresponding icons, right? For tasks, we had this check mark. For the projects, we had the target, and then actually move that into something that I would call backend. If you have a very simple setup, that could just be a toggle, right, that you call backend. If you have, you know, something more complex, I would recommend that you create a separate page that contains all your key databases. And now with that out of the way, we can freely design our page. If you also have a fairly large monitor like I do, then I like to work with 2-column layout. If you have a very small one, then you might need to see whether 2 columns, you know, take up too much space and maybe like organize it differently. But let's actually start with that. So let's type /col for 2 columns. And then in the left action and in the left one, I would like to have some quick actions. So let's type /h2 and let's just call this quick actions. And then on the other side, I will call this, again, add here my an h2, and I will call this inbox. We're building that out in a second. Now, below that, I will add a divider, left and right, just for some you know, visual separation. And because we don't need so much space for the quick actions, I can actually now resize my columns to, you know, take up a lot more space on the right than on the left. And then below the quick actions, I can add some buttons to quickly trigger things. So how does that work? Well, let's just go in here and make sure that this is actually below the column, right? Sometimes you might accidentally grab one of the full ones. So you can just grab this line and pull it until this blue indicator is small below the quick actions. And then here say, okay, /button. And now we can set up a button to quickly capture tasks instead of, you know, having to go to the database. So the first one, let's just call this, you know, new task. And here we can then say, okay, as the icon, I want the check mark and say when this button is clicked, add an action. Please add a page to, and now I set my task database. And then you see here as empty. So here I can now pick a specific template that I want to use. So I want to say, please add this as a standard new task. And when doing so, we could then also edit properties, right? So we could say, okay, set the name by default to, you know, new one also. But we actually don't need to do that. But instead, what we want to do in case we want to, you know, modify it immediately, we want to say, okay, and then please open this page as side peek. All right. And then for the select page, we want to say the page that we just created. Let's click on done and see how it works. Now, when I click this button, the sidebar pops up with a new task, and I can just label it, okay, you know, something important I nearly forgot. Oh, and while we're here, we want to also tidy up this section, of course, same as we did with the projects. So let's say, what are the things that we actually need to see here? Well, we definitely want to see the status at the very top. We want to see the context. We want to see the due date. We actually here, we don't need to have any days remaining. We don't need to see the finish date here. So let's hide these. For subtasks, we don't need to see that here as well. The project we want to see. Start time again, right? Because this is more occasional, situational, that we want to see these buttons. So let's keep them for now, but hide the other stuff, right? Just so to tidy things up and make this a lot less overwhelming, right? Looks already much better. Perfect. So our first button is ready. And now we can do the same for like some other type of task, right? So let's actually just duplicate this button. Command D is the shortcut for that, or clicking on the 6 dots and then clicking on duplicate. And now click on the gear icon to modify it and say, okay, you know, new high energy task. And here select our different icon, right? And then say again, when this one is added, add it not as a new task, but add it as a high energy task. And then again, open it as in side view. And then one last thing, let's also add another one for new task for today. Also super useful. So here, let's use the calendar icon and say, okay, here it should be a new task, but this time we want to edit a property. We want to edit the due date, and we want to set the due date to the current day. So let's click on OK. And now we see again, if we just try this out, new task for today, we would see, okay, it automatically filled in the due date for today. And of course, like in all the other views, right, it will pop up in the right context there. Just one last button for good measure. We need, of course, also want to create a new project. So type / button, and you can, of course, adjust this to whatever it is you need, right? If you have like different types of projects, you could do that as well. So let's add our project type icon. Let's say, okay, new project. And here, when the button is clicked, this time we want to add a page to our projects database. You see, it also already selected the new project one because we set that as default. So that's great. We can say, okay, the name will be new project. We can't, unfortunately, can't open like a command prompt to ask us, okay, what should the name be? We always need to then say as another step that we want to, open the page that we just created in SidePeek to then like actually modify it properly. All right. Now, these are our quick actions. So now let's look at the rest of the page and structure that part. We're going to actually ignore the inbox part for now, and we just will continue somewhere else on this page in this other column on the side. Oh, and while I'm doing this, I'm realizing this new project button, I accidentally didn't add it to the column, but below on the page. So just gonna quickly drag it here, and also going to drag a space in between those, just to visually separate that a little bit. Just realized it now when pressing enter here a few times. So here, what I will do is now I create another H2, and I will call this tasks. And then below the H2, we will add a linked view for our task database. Or actually, let's, instead of using an H2, let's turn this into an H2 toggle, because that way we can then, hide the task if we don't want to see that. And again, just creates a more minimal, less cluttered view. Perfect. So now inside our opening our toggle and then clicking here inside, we can now create a linked view to our task database. So let's type / create linked view of database, pick the task database. And because we've done all the work already, right, by setting up these views, we can just click on the view that we want and then have it here. It's already set up. The only thing we need to do always is then to hide the database title for, a more minimal and cleaner view. So we have our today view here. Let's go in here again and say, okay, from the task database, I also want to pull in the overdue view. Again, hide the database title. And then one third click brings in the this week view, again, hiding the unnecessary information. You see how quick that was? And because you set it up once, like whenever you have now different dashboards, it's so much faster to build than having to rebuild these views every single time. And even if there's a specific view that doesn't quite fit the ones that you've created, it's much easier like that, right? Because you can just pull in something that is the closest to what you want and then update it accordingly. So let's just actually add the Kanban as the very last thing for good measure. Where is it? We can also just like search for it. Perfect. Here's our Kanban view. And again, hide this. And here you now also see why it can be helpful to be able to, like untoggle this, because if you have a lot of information there, it just makes for a much cleaner look on the page. So those were our tasks. Now let's again type /H2, pick the toggle heading to, and here take our projects. And for projects, let's again just pull the information in, create link view from database. So projects database, and here the Kanban view. Now, one view that I forgot to set up, which I usually also quite like to set up for projects, so we'll just do it here now, is to create a gallery view to just quickly, jump into individual information. So let's just duplicate this one and say, okay, let's call this maybe active projects and use, like a box or a container. Do we have something? Yeah, the active ones. This is a nice one. No, that looks like an archive. Maybe let's just take an arrow. Active projects. And here we want to change the layout from board to gallery. And we want to, let's move this here. And we don't want to have this page preview, right? So we're going to turn the page preview off. The card size can be small. Now we have these nice little icons here. The pages should be opened in a SidePeek. And then we want to show some information again, right? So under properties, let's show here the progress and the next task. The status doesn't need to be shown because we will filter this now and say, okay, here, show me only the projects where, let's remove this, the status is, in progress, right? To just show me my active projects. Now I have the one here, and this just allows me to really quickly use this as a navigation bar, right? To then jump into the project and in the project, see then all the tasks relevant to that project or any other information, right, that you choose to pull in here. This is already coming together nicely. So now let's focus on the inbox. And for me, the inbox is an area that captures every information that I put into the Notion system and makes sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So I want to pull all the entries that I create in here and just, have a second go at them to check, okay, is there something I need to add to them? So let's click on the 6 dots and actually also turn this into a toggle to keep in line with the rest of the design. And then let's pull in here first our tasks database. And here we can just take the table. Usually, again, I would set up this inbox view on the main database so I can just pull it in, but for now, let's just create it here. And now make sure that first we remove all properties and then only show the ones that I want to look at here. So I want to definitely see the status, right? I want to be able to tick something off if it has already been done. And I want to be able to see the due date, the context, and the project. Right? This is the core information that I want to see about every entry that I have here in my database. All right, so now I want to set up a filter so that I don't see everything, but only the entries where I still need to fill something out. So in order to do that, let's add an advanced filter and say first, the status of the task should not be done. Because if it's done, then I don't need to, if it's done, is not done. Because if it's done, then I don't need to, worry about adding any information to it. And then I want to add a group and I want to make sure, okay, show it when it's not done and when either due date or project is empty. So let's go to due date and say due date is not empty or the project is empty. So either the due date is empty or the project is empty. And now I get this view of all basically incomplete tasks in my system, right? So here task 3, I forgot, here I haven't set a due date. So I can just set a due date for it and it will disappear from this view. New task hasn't been assigned to a project. So, okay, let's assign this to a project, disappears from the view and so on, right? For example, for task E, if I just check this off because I say, well, this is actually done, again, disappears. And now you just have this dynamic view at the top of your database that you can now check once a day to make sure all these things that you've added with the buttons or somewhere else are just properly, filed in the system. So let's do the same thing for projects. So let's just rename this view quickly to tasks. So we know, okay, what this is about. This is about our checkmark tasks. And then let's pull in here the projects next to it. And again, just quickly set up that view, right? So let's call this projects. Let's add the target to it, hide all properties. So what do we want to see for every project? For a project, we definitely want to know maybe just like the duration. Maybe that's everything I actually care for in this case for the duration. When do I actually plan to do it? And then again, just hide the database title and make sure, okay, here again, set up the filter to say, all right, we want to make sure that the status of the project is not done, right? That won't happen so often that we have actually a project that is done before we have filed it, but just in case, let's set up. And then here we could, for good measure, right? Because we might have to adapt it later, say, okay, add a group and say the duration is empty. And now I see, okay, these are empty. So I could now fill it out and say, okay, this is actually from here to, end date there. And now it disappears from the view. And I have my inbox also properly set up. Now I just want to show you one neat little trick for your dashboard. Let's actually just remove the space here to, have this spaced out a bit more evenly. And that is freeze columns. In your, some of your views, you might have a ton of properties, a lot more than I have here. So let's actually just, for example, pull in the full table view. And that can get quite unruly because you need to now scroll to the side and you might lose context here in the beginning. So what you want to do in these situations is you want to right click the name property or whatever, main properties you care about and freeze it. Freezing means that if you now scroll to the side, you will keep these two stuck here in the beginning, right? And you can now always see, okay, the start tracking is actually relevant for task A and so on and so on. This task manager is now already in a great position. But if you want to use it as a team, you need to add a few elements to it. First up, we need to go to our task database again and add an assignee person, right? That's the most important property that's currently missing. We don't know who's supposed to do something. So let's add a person property and call this responsible. Whoops. So now we can easily assign the different tasks to a specific person. We're going to be also able to do the same on the team one. So we go into projects and here again, say create 2 new properties, one for the at least one property, at least one for the responsible, so like the lead. And then typically, if you have a bigger team, I like to also create another people property that indicates the team. And then just changing the icons here. So from the person from 2, we go here to 3, and here from the lead, we go from 2 to the one person. All right, that's the first modification that we need to happen. Now, the next thing you need to do is allow people to filter only for their specific projects. And again, it's best to create them right now as the default views on your main database. So let's go in here and let's create actually a Kanban that only shows me the projects that are assigned to me. So I will duplicate this and I will call this, my projects. And here I can now go into the filter and say, here in my, my all filter that is still, falling me on my feet. So I need to change it and say here again, let's create this as a group. So remove this, turn into a group. That's actually best practice whenever you have set an all filter. Just forgot it earlier and say, okay, the duration is empty. And then the second option that we want to have here, then that's the thing we actually came for, is to make sure that this is assigned to me. So we want to say, and the lead contains me. Now, you don't want to pick your name, you want to pick me, because me will update dynamically to the person who is currently logged in and only show that person the thing. So you don't need to create separate views for all your different team members. You can just create this once and whoever is logged in and looks at this will see their projects. We can of course expand this then, right, and say turn this into a group and say where either the lead is me or the team contains me. So now I see everything that is relevant for me. And I might also want to, in the general Kanban, turn on to see, okay, in the properties, the lead as a thing that I can quickly see that I see, okay, who actually has to do something. Perfect. So that's it for the task, and of course, and for the projects. And on the task, you want to do then the same, right? In terms of the me filter, you want to go in and say, okay, my tasks today, for example. So let's go in here and let's duplicate this. My tasks today, and again add to the filter that you've already set up another and status where you say and responsible contains me. Now this can be quite a bit of work right in the beginning if you set up all these views here. If you say, okay, I want all these views in general for the whole team and I want them also for the individual people, but you just need to go through the months and you can pull them in quickly. Now, one thing that I would say is definitely also worth doing on the task database is just like we have, tasks by project, create another one where we say tasks by assignee. So again, we will duplicate this and say quickly tasks by, assignee or responsible, and pick here the person thing and just change our group from project to the responsible person. And here, again, say hide empty groups. And now we see, okay, we only have these tasks when no one is responsible. So all of these need to be quickly assigned so someone actually can do them. Now, if you have a particularly large organization, then you might want to expand your setup also by a teams database, right? So on top of tasks and projects, we also want to have teams. So let's just create here a new page. Oops, this disappeared. Let's just type page, teams, and turn this into a table, right? So here we create our database right away, new database. Teams can assign it the corresponding icon. And here we can then have the people who are in the team. So we could add person properties, but let's leave that out for now. The main thing we care about is a relation to our task database, right? So tasks, show on task database, team, and same for then the projects relation for projects database, show on both ends, projects and here as well, team, add the relation, switch quickly the icons out for projects and for tasks. And now what you can do is on the tasks and projects database, you can connect every single entry to a team. And then on the teams, you can, just like you did before with the projects, create these dashboards that show you all the projects and all tasks of that team at one glance. And that means you don't need to create like individual dashboard for teams, right? You could of course also do it manually, but here, whenever you add a new team, you just add it here and it has automatically a dashboard generated. So let's call this new team. And here, let's go in here just to show you and call this first, the H1, projects. And then below that, we have another H1 for tasks. And we pull in here with the same little trick for related entries. First, all the related projects from the let's take the Kanban and set up here the filter to say, okay, this and this. Again, the same issue, but that's why you should do it in the menu so you don't have to redo it every single time. So we say, okay, and add filter rule where we say, and the team relation, forgot we have the same name here, so we would need to change that, where team contains the new team. All right, and that means now that whenever we have something here, we will see all team-related projects there. And the same for the task if we want to say, okay, task database, let's show me also here the Kanban, and also here make sure that our filter is expanded by the, now you see, right, why we should always create and filters, not or like nested or filters. Otherwise, this can be quite cumbersome. So we say, and the team contains the new team. Perfect. Hide it here as well. And now we just created this very quick and easy thing where we have our different teams in here. We set this, of course, as a default, and we will pull in edit, set as default, for all teams. Our first team, and we have automatically a dashboard for that team created where they can see all the tasks and all the projects that belong to them. And if they create new ones, they will automatically be tagged with that corresponding team. Now you have an awesome task manager in Notion. But how cool would it be if this could now turn into your personal assistant? Something that shows you quick insights and an actionable breakdown of your day. Well, you can get that with just a few adjustments, and I have a complete tutorial for you. Just click here and I will see you in a few seconds.